I've reviewed 4 out of the 5 commander decks from the March of the Machines commander set. If you're a new player who's getting into Magic the Gathering for the first time, congratulations. Seriously, this commander set has been fantastic and you really can't go wrong picking any of these commander decks. In today's video, we're going to be reviewing the Tinker Time commander deck. Listen, I just bought the deck it released. I don't know what cards are going to be inside this deck, so I'm literally just going to open it up and react to it now. By the end of this video, you're going to learn how this deck plays, you're going to learn how you're going to want to upgrade this deck, and then the monetary value you receive by investing in these cards. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we see here with this commander deck. Honestly, out of all the commander decks up to this point that we've seen, I'm anticipating that this deck right here is going to be just as powerful as all the other commander decks that I've seen up to this point. The commander for this commander deck is Gimbal, Gremlin, Prodigy. He reads, artifact creatures you control have trample. At the beginning of your end step, create a 0/0 red Gremlin artifact creature token and put X+1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of differently named artifact tokens you control. The first card we have other than the commander is Rashmi and Ragavan. Whenever you cast your first spell during each of your turns, exile the top card of target opponent's library and create a treasure token. Then you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if a spell with mana value less than the number of artifacts you control. If you don't cast it this way, you may cast it this turn. Seems like a pretty decent card. It's gonna allow you to draw a card from your opponent's deck, and it's also creating a treasure token, so it's increasing the chances that you have enough artifacts to cast a spell for free, and if not, it's going to give you mana to be able to cast the spell, which works out pretty well. I like this card, it's pretty good. Next card we have is Command Tower. Okay, we have Crack Open, which is going to destroy artifact or enchantment. Cool. Evolving Wilds, Fractured Power Stone, taps for 2, adds mana. It's pretty good. We have a Gruul Signet, the Izzet Signet. We have a Path of Ancestry, Reverse Engineer. This has Improvise, which essentially says that your artifacts can help cast the spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1, and you can draw 3 cards. So essentially you can pay 2 mana to draw 3 cards at sorcery speed, so only during your turn. We have Root Out, another destroy artifact or enchantment, and then you investigate. So it's a decent card. It's going to create the token that you're looking for, and you're going to be able to destroy artifact or enchantment. We have a Simic Signet, more RAM. We have a Terramorphic Expanse, Thoughtcast, which has affinity for artifacts, so you can be able to reduce the mana value for this as well. You can pay up to 1 mana to draw 2 cards on your turn. We have the Replication Ring. You pay 3 mana for this. You can tap to add 1 mana of any color. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a night counter Replication Ring. Then if it has 8 or more night counters on it, remove all of them and create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replication Ring with add 1 mana of any color. Well, that was a lot of words. When this card triggers, it's going to create 8 copies of itself, essentially ramping you or creating 8 mana for you to be able to spend on your turn, which is pretty good if you ever have the ability to get this off. I have friends that play this card as their win condition. We have an Arcane Signet, Combine Chrysalis. This is going to give your creature tokens flying. We have the Curse of Opulence. This card says whenever enchanted player is attacked, create a gold token. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. I tend to cast these spells on myself when I'm playing them, just so that as people attack me, I get to generate extra mana every time somebody attacks me. And if you're playing a ton of tokens inside this commander deck, you're going to have creatures that are going to be able to block. So at the worst, your opponents don't want to attack you, so they don't give you more mana. Works out pretty well. And it also buffs your creatures, technically. Frontier Bovak, land. The Gearper, Aether Grid, nice. You can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to deal 1 damage to any target. This deck obviously wants to create a ton of artifacts, so being able to tap these artifacts down to deal damage seems pretty good. We have a Junk Winder, affinity for tokens. Whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls. It doesn't untap during its opponent's untap step. Guys, I mean, this does have affinity for tokens, so at minimum, you could cast this for 2 mana. I'm thinking that you generally cast this for 5. And if you can time this right and you're able to cast this and then generate tokens, you can immediately start tapping your opponent's things down. This is a pretty nice control piece over here. I like this card. Myriad Landscape, Reality Shift. This is going to let you exile a creature. We have Saheeli. This is pretty decent. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. You can -2, and target artifact you control becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature you control until the end of turn, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It's a pretty decent way to create more artifacts so that you can buff your creatures. I like this card. I think it's pretty decent. When I play this card in Commander, it feels good. We have the Almighty Soul Ring. We have Struggle and Survive. Struggle says deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control. Yeah, I don't know how many lands we're going to have in this deck. You usually want to play this card in a landfall deck. Aftermath says that each player shuffles their graveyard into their library. Okay, that's certainly a card. I'm not sure if that's generally what this deck wants to be doing, but hey, you have it now if you bought it. Tireless Provisioner. Speaking of landfall, so this is what I was just talking about. So this card says, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token. It's a decent card inside this deck. If this deck, you might want to play more cards inside here that give you more lands so that this card becomes a little bit more reliable. But I mean, it's more tokens. It's gonna buff your gremlins. It's a good card inside this deck. Vampire's Vengeance, interesting in a non-vampire deck. Vampire's Vengeance deals 2 damage to each non-vampire creature. Create a blood token. I mean, I'm happy this card exists. I'm probably just gonna end up putting this card inside of a vampire deck if I'm being honest. I'll take this out. Weirding Wood. This enters the battlefield and you're gonna investigate. Enchanted land has add 2 mana of any 1 color. Okay, so it's gonna create another token. Artifacts inside this deck are good. We have a Schema Thief. This is a new card. Flying. Whenever Schema Thief deals combat damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of target artifact that player controls. Dude, that's a fun card, dude. I've never seen a card like this before. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact that player controls. I mean, what if they have a Soul Ring and you just keep hitting them and you get this double strike and now every time you hit them, you create 2 Soul Rings? Seems like a pretty good card right here. Oh man, the Sandstep War Riders. What is this? Trample. At the beginning of combat on your turn, bolster X, where X is the number of differently named artifact tokens you control. When you bolster, you choose a creature with the least toughness among creatures you control and put X +1/+1 counters on it. What I like about this card over here is that it triggers every single combat, which means when I talked about earlier about playing extra turns, I think this deck is going to do best when you're playing cards that are going to give you extra turns. It reminds me of this wand that I know exists that gives you the ability to have extra turns. I would like a strategy for this deck where you're able to utilize that card to its fullest, take the extra turns, get the tokens every single turn, get the buffs every single turn, and just outvalue your opponents by taking extra turns. I think it sounds pretty cool. That's how I'm gonna build this deck at least. Good card. Cutthroat Negotiator. Okay. Whenever Cutthroat Negotiator attacks, each player reveals the top card of their library. For each non-land card revealed this way, you create a tapped treasure token, then each player draws a card. Okay, so it's just gonna create a ton of treasures for you apparently, and then each player is gonna draw a card, but still, like, for each non-land card revealed this way, you create a tapped treasure token. It's gonna buff your creatures. It's a good card. I would keep this inside the deck. We have a Hedron. What is that? A Hedron Detonator. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Hedron Detonator deals 1 damage to target opponent. You can tap this to sacrifice 2 artifacts, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So this is going to be some form of card draw. I like this card in a deck where you're just, I would rather play this in a mono red commander deck that had to do with artifacts, and just use that, because we do have the color blue inside this deck. So I would rather not exile cards from my library, because there tend to be cards that let you, reuse those spells. And if you exile them, they're kind of gone. While this is definitely going to deal damage, and please understand, like, this card can probably win you a game, I just would be more excited for this in a deck where that needed this type of card advantage, as opposed to playing this in a deck that has blue. That's just the way I think. It's a good card though, you can keep it. Ichor Elixir, you're gonna pay 4 mana to tap 2. Path of the Animist. Okay, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So this is 4 mana, which is pretty nice. Basic explosive vegetation. Starting with you, each player votes for Planeswalk Chaos if Planeswalk gets more votes, Planeswalk if Chaos gets more votes, and the vote is tied, or the vote is tied. We're not going to go over the Planeswalking portion for the new players that are here. Let's just keep it focused. We have a Pain Distributor. They keep using this art on cards. Menace. Whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, they create a treasure token. Okay, so this affects everybody. Whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Pain Distributor deals 1 damage to that player. We have Dance with Calamity. Shuffle your library. As many times as you choose, you may exile the top card of your library. If the total mana value of cards exiled this way is 13 or less, you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana cost. This is 8 mana. This card is kind of gambling. You're just gonna continue to exile cards with this. I would rather play this in a deck where my creatures care about exiling cards. And not to say that it's not going to play good inside this deck. I mean, if you want to keep this inside this deck, you keep it. I just think that this plays really well inside decks that care about exiling cards. And inside this deck, I don't know if it's really that important to exile cards, but it is a good card. We have Pia and Kiran Nalar. When this enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless stop-to artifact creature tokens with flying. You can pay 3 and sacrifice an artifact. And then this card's going to deal 2 damage to any target. It's decent. You're going to be able to control the board by destroying your artifacts with this card. It's not bad. Felden of the Third Path. You're going to be able to pay 3 and you create a token of target creature card in your graveyard, except it's an artifact. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. What's great about Felden is that you're exiling, not even exiling, you're creating that creature token and it doesn't exile the card in your graveyard. Chaos Warp. Fantastic removal. You keep this. Stroke of Genius. This is instant speed, and you can draw as many cards as you want in relation to the amount of mana that you pay into X. Academy Manufacturer. If you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create 1 of each. Nice. That's a good way to triple the amount of tokens you're making, It's not bad. Aid from the Cowl. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a permanent card, you may put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. At 5 mana, it seems kind of expensive. It does give you the ability to cheat cards into play. I just think that this is, for 5 mana to scry 1, essentially, I think is kind of a lot. We have a Bloodforged Battle Axe. Okay. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of the Bloodforged Battle Axe. So talking about a very useful token to have, Definitely going to help to deal a lot of damage. Brass's Bounty is a perfect card inside this deck. Wow. For each land you control, create a treasure token. We have a Cinderglade. Echo Storm. Whenever you cast this spell, for each time you cast your commander from the game, you're going to copy it. This also says create a token that's a copy of target artifact. Nice. This card can win games, honestly. The Everquill Phoenix. Whenever this creature mutates, create a red artifact token named Feather with 1. Sacrifice Feather. Return target Phoenix card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you can mutate this onto one of your tokens to give one of your tokens flying. so that it's easier for it to deal damage. Not bad. Exotic Orchard, Fiery Confluence. Choose 3, you may choose the same mode more than once. Fiery Confluence deals 1 damage to each creature, deals 2 damage to each opponent, or destroys target artifact. Decent card. I would keep this card inside the deck. I think it's cool. Frostboil Snarl, Game Trail, the Gilded Goose. Dude, I get a Gilded Goose inside this commander deck. Nice. Flying, when Gilded Goose enters the battlefield, create a food token. You can then tap the Gilded Goose to sacrifice a food to add 1 mana of any color, and also you can pay 2 mana to create a food token itself. Decent card. I really like this card. This is like the perfect turn 1 play inside this commander deck. Nice, guys. This card, if you draw this card, hold on to this card, guys, because this card is gonna win you games. The Hellkite Igniter says Flying Haste. You can pay 2 mana. Hellkite Igniter gets +X/+0 until the end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Keep in mind that you can pay that 2 mana as many times as you want. So if I have 10 artifacts in play, I can pay 2 mana to buff my Igniter by 10. And then if I pay 2 mana again, it gets buffed by 10. And then if I pay 2 mana again, it gets buffed by 10, and so on and so forth. And I think you're understanding what I'm saying. This card can just one-shot people. Good card. Imprisoned in the Moon, just a good way to remove your opponent's creatures temporarily. We have the Inspiring Statuary. Non-artifact spells you control have Improvise. So Improvise is your artifacts can help cast those spells. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1. Nice. This is a decent card inside this deck. It's gonna ramp and make everything a lot cheaper. We have Master of Ethereum. This creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts you control. Okay, other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. Decent card. I mean, personally, I would probably take this card out of the deck, but that's just me. We have the Masterful Replication. This card wins games. You can create 2 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens, or, more importantly, you can choose target artifact you control, and each other artifact you control becomes a copy of that artifact until the end of turn. Which means that you could just choose an artifact you control, make 7 copies of that, and then just deal damage. This is at instant speed, so you generally play this card where you're telling your opponent, hey, I'm gonna attack you with these creatures over here, and then they'll say, okay, no blocks, and then you're like, okay, well now all those creatures are now this creature instead, now take that much damage, and you just knock people out of the game generally when you do that. Good card. Perplexing Test says, choose 1, return all creature tokens to their owner's hands, or you can return all non-token creatures to their owner's hands. This is usually just a one-sided board wipe. I've had this card win me at least 3 or 4 games of Commander. This card is really good. You always keep this card inside this deck no matter what. We have Rise and Shine. Target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature. Put 4 +1/+1 counters on each artifact that became a creature this way. This does have Overload, so you could essentially target every single artifact that you control with this card and just have a giant board. Saheeli's Artistry, and this is going to help you create a token that's a copy of artifact you control, and you can also create a token that's a copy of target creature as well. So 6 mana for 2 token copies of something. Decent. Sharding Sphinx. Oh, this is a good card. Whenever an artifact creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying. It's going to create a Thopter token, so it's going to be able to buff your gremlins. It's good. It's a good card. Shimmer Dragon. Oh, nice. As long as you control 4 more artifacts, Shimmer Dragon has hexproof. So essentially this card says it has flying and hexproof because you're always going to have 4 more artifacts. You can also tap 2 untapped artifacts you control and draw a card. Nice, dude. That's a great card inside this deck. Skyclave Relic. Oh, this has Indestructible. Kicker 3, when Skyclave Relic enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 tapped tokens that are copies of the Skyclave Relic. You can also tap this to add 1 mana of any color. Nice. Oh, Spell Swindle. This is a good counter spell, guys. This is a good card. Counter target spell, create X treasure tokens where X is that spell's mana value. Not bad, pretty good. I like that card. Spine of Ishsa. When this enters the battlefield, you can destroy a permanent. Remember, this is 7 mana, so it's a decent card, but that's a lot of mana. Temple of Abandon, Temple of Epiphany, Temple of Mystery, Thopter Assembly. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no Thopters other than Thopter Assembly, return Thopter Assembly to its owner's hand and create 5/1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. This is just always a generic include inside artifact decks, I think. I've seen Thopter Assembly in so many precons, but it's there for a reason because it's generally just a really good card, and if you're a new player, it's just a good card to have in your collection. And I think it works pretty well inside this deck. Thopter Spy Network. Oh, we should have more cards that do things like this in this deck. Beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. But more importantly, whenever one or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So if you're attacking multiple players, you have the ability to draw multiple cards. Tireless Tracker. More landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. Guys, this is a really good card. I really like this card. I don't know if landfall is really a strategy that this deck wants to go together with. Maybe it is, I could be wrong, but it's just a good card to have, and it creates the tokens that you need. The Vidalcan Humiliator. Nice. So whenever Vidalcan Humiliator attacks, if you control 3 or more artifacts, creatures your opponents control lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1/1 until the end of turn. This card played at the right time can end games. Very good card. Vine Glimmer Snarl. We have the Workshop Elders. Guys, honestly, like, I'm looking at a lot of these cards over here and I've yet to see one card that is where I look at it and I'm like, this is why you buy this commander deck. This is a chase card. I haven't seen a chase card. Not to say like it needs a chase card. I just want to point out that I haven't really seen one yet. We have a Workshop Elders. Other than some of the exiling cards, actually, I'll take that back. Some of the exiling cards were pretty good and are bombs in other commander decks. I just don't necessarily know if they're bombs inside this commander deck. So we have Workshop Elders. Artifact creatures you control have flying. Cool. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may have target non-creature artifact you control become a 0/0 artifact creature. If you do, put 4 counters on it. Decent card. This card can win you games by giving artifacts flying at the right time. We have the Whirler Rogue. When this enters the battlefield, you create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. You can then tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, and target creature can't be blocked this turn. So it's a really good way to make your creatures unblockable. We have an island here, and I think we actually reached the entirety of the deck, guys. Okay, I mean, what do I think about this commander deck? Honestly, my gut tells me right now that this deck is about a 6 out of 10. I think that the value you get for this commander deck, I'm not too sure how much value is here when I'm looking at this, honestly. There are good cards inside here, please understand, and there are some staples inside here, like some of the landfall cards inside here were pretty good. I just look at this and say, like, this deck is good. You know, I wouldn't run out to the game store and buy this deck immediately. I think if you upgrade this the right way, especially with the extra turn spells, I think that would be pretty fun inside this commander deck. On a fun factor, I think this deck would be like an 8 out of 10. I just think that when I look at this, you know, as someone that's brand new, I'm thinking like, okay, I have to create this token. And then you have to go and grab the tokens that you have, put the tokens into play. Oh, and then I do this thing, and then I get to make this token. And they grab the token, they put that token into play, and then they have to read what the token does. And then, you know, you get a blood token, you put the token onto the battlefield, you look at this, you have to read the card says something different, and I feel like there's just a lot going on inside this commander deck. So from a brand new player's perspective, I feel like you're gonna have to be thinking a lot about and managing a lot about what you're gonna have on your board, and the strategy just feels like there's a lot going on. You may want to go out and get a different commander deck before you get this one. unless you're an experienced player. If you're an experienced player, you already know what you want to do with this commander deck. I don't even have to tell you what to do. I think you and I both can see the potential inside this commander deck. You and I both know how these decks tend to play. So I think that this deck from an advanced player's perspective is fantastic. You know, just like all the other precons is fantastic. I just think that if you're a brand new player, I think your money may be better spent getting a different commander deck. But listen, if you just really dig the art and you want to play this commander deck, by all means, just have fun. That's all that matters. That's the most important thing. If you haven't seen any of the other reviews, I highly suggest you click on the playlist and you can go ahead and check out those reviews as well for the other precons, okay? I hope you have an amazing day. Always remember, eat healthy, okay? Work out every single day, all right? And most importantly, always remember, believe in yourself, people, all right? Peace out.
I love you, God! Damn, I'm true! Shit is true!